You can completely change your life using the power of imagination. I learned a lot of very valuable techniques in the book The Law and the Promise by Neville Goddard. I read it in this book, The Power of Imagination, which is a collection of Neville's best books. I really enjoyed the book The Law and the Promise because there were a lot of great stories that would illustrate the techniques. We're going to take a look at one of the techniques a woman used to completely change her life. This technique was called revision. So first, Neville instructs us to do the revision process right before going to sleep and while actually falling asleep. And the first thing you need to do, obviously, is get a very detailed and specific goal. After that, while you're going into this revision state, you're going to start imagining the fulfillment of your dream life or goal. You want to make this imagination as detailed and realistic as possible. And what you're going to do is keep that imagination playing in your mind over and over, and then fall asleep while you're living through that imagination. You need to do this process every single night, and what you'll notice is that the more you do this, the more realistic and possible your goal will seem to you. So let's move into the story that Neville puts in his book. It's a woman writing to him, and it goes, "Last August, while on a blind date, I met the man I wanted to marry. This happens sometimes, and it happened to me. He was everything I had ever thought of as desirable in a husband. 2 days after this enchanted evening, it was necessary for me to change my place of residence because of my work. And that same week, the mutual friend who had introduced me to this man moved away from the city. I realized that the man I had met probably did not know of my new address, and frankly, I was not sure he knew my name. After your last lecture, I spoke to you of the situation. Although I had plenty of other dates, I could not forget this one man. Your lecture was based on revising our day, and after speaking to you, I determined to revise my day every day. Before going to sleep that night, I felt I was in a different bed in my own home, as a married woman, and not as a single working girl sharing an apartment with 3 other girls. I twisted an imaginary wedding band on my imaginary left hand, saying over and over to myself, 'This is wonderful, I really am Mrs. J.E.' And I fell asleep in what was a moment before a waking dream." She goes on to say, "I repeated this imaginary scene for 1 month, night after night. The first week in October, he found me. On our second date, I knew my dreams were rightly placed. Your teaching tells us to live in the end of our desire until that desire becomes fact. So although I did not know how he felt toward me, I continued night after night, living in the feeling of my dream realized. The results? In November, he proposed. In January, we announced our engagement, and the following May, we were married. The loveliest part of it all, however, is that I am happier than I have ever dreamed possible, and I know in my heart he is too. Mrs. J.E." Neville then says, by using her imagination radically instead of conservatively, by building her world out of pure dreams of fancy, rather than using images supplied by memory, she brought about the fulfillment of her dream. Common sense would have used images supplied by her memory and thereby perpetuated the fact of lack in her life. Imagination created what she desired out of a dream of fancy. Everyone must live wholly on the level of imagination, and it must be consciously and deliberately undertaken. I think this is a great section of the book. It shows a woman using the power of her imagination to absolutely change her life. You can take these principles and change your life too. One of my favorite scriptures on this subject is Hebrews 11:1. It says, "Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen." And one of the ways to interpret this verse is to replace hope for imagination. So if you can have faith and assurance in your imagination and conviction in that imagination, even if you can't see it in your physical reality, it will come into fruition. Make sure you try this technique out. It is a very powerful thing to do, and it's easy. It won't take it up any of your time because it's just something you do before going to sleep anyway. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.